Hello, Insiders, and welcome to this unbelievably special edition of The Inside Job with Philip Cox, the podcast. Today is a really, really cool day because I have my dad in town, and Dad has come from across the pond. He's come from Nashville, Tennessee, but I'm going to let him tell a little bit about that. We're gonna do a little storytelling today and see what kind of comes out of that. So, yeah, my dad is in town. So, Dad, welcome to the Inside Job podcast.
Well, it's nice to be here as a guest and not just a listener.
Yeah,
I've heard of you. I've been to Australia once, so nothing here is happening for the first time except for the fact that we're sitting here talking and I'm not just listening.
Yes, and Dad and I can go on long. Something about our family. We have got a million inside jokes that, of course, I'm sure that, I guess that's true of every family, I don't know, but we've got so many inside jokes and so many funny stories. And when Dad and I get together, or when any of us brothers get together, we do the normal catching up on what's going on in life, but so much of the time is spent reminiscing, telling stories, laughing at just some of the dumbest stuff, but it's stuff that it brings so much joy and so much laughter to us and these crazy stories that happen. And so Dad and I were having one of these reminiscing conversations the other day, and I thought that would be such a great story. It's such a good setup for so much of what we talk about here on this podcast. And I said, Dad, we got to record that. Would you be up for turning on a mic and telling that story? And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to tell us this story has fallen into the annals of Cox family history, and I'm sure it will eventually become what is folklore. But this is a legendary story inside of our home. So, Dad, before we get into the story, I want everybody to just hear from you just a little bit about what your story is, where you've kind of come from, how old you are, the places you've lived, whatever you think is pertinent. Tell us about. This is not just Dad. This is Randall Morris Cox, my dad. So, Dad, take it away. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I've never been asked such a thing before. It's not a job interview, so, okay, June 4th, 1958. Nobody would ask me on that on a job interview, but that you can do the math. That makes me 60, almost 7, which just seems uncanny because I feel like I'm 36,
Yeah.
But that would make you older than me, so we'll not say any more about that. But I was born in Alabama, Florence, Alabama, and went to Richmond, Virginia at age 5 and spent 5 years there, very formative years. Moved from Virginia, which is south also, but when you're from Alabama, that's up north. And you come back and you kind of go through a culture shock because we moved from a large city to a small town in Alabama, and it was a little bit of a culture shock. But anyway, got past that and lived in Alabama till I was about 21, and we went to Georgia, which is not exactly a move anywhere out of the South. So that's what I'm a Southern U.S. I went from there back to Alabama again, and then Huntsville, Alabama, and that's where I spent a lot of I'd say the bulk of my working and adult life. And that's the story we've been talking about, happened in Huntsville, Alabama, but in 2014, moved to the Nashville, Tennessee area, which is where I blasted off from to come here for this trip. So that's where I intend to be back in about a week. So
Okay, that's a very quick snapshot. So I want to go back. So you said you moved from Alabama to Virginia, to a big city, and what was it that caused you to move back to the South from Virginia?
Okay, well, the thing that got us up there was my dad was a preacher, and so it was
Okay.
a preaching change. And then after 5 years there, the same thing, just another position preaching, and and then the part of the Christianity we were a part of that moved him back to Alabama. So we were now in North Alabama. I'm 10 years old, 5th grade, and that's where I got back into. Well, not back in. Went into the 5th grade and went through high school in that same system. So that's 8 years in the same school system, growing into teenagehood.
Yeah.
Got married very early, age 20. I got married.
Wow.
I was married, and by age 20, I was actually a month shy of that. And then 2 years in Georgia, where I gave preaching a shot myself.
Mm-hmm.
That was what I was told I needed to do. Well,
right.
Situations change, and you become convinced otherwise too long of a story, but anyway,
It's a story for another episode.
For another episode,
Okay.
and then at age 23, back to Alabama. Decided to go back to school and studied computer science. My wife, your mom,
Yeah.
we came back together.
Yeah.
And then after 2 years, getting a little more education, getting some foundation to advance from that further into education was
Yeah.
the plan. That's what got me to Huntsville, Alabama, because it got us into a
Okay.
more technological center, which was computer science is my territory and a good place to be. And that was 1983,
Yeah.
age 25, and that's exactly what I was doing. That pretty well covers 30 years of, as far as, the world of work and such things. Major changes happened, of course. We lost my wife, your mom, in 2010. Again, another long story, of course. That's not what we're talking about here, but just if you want to know the picture, there's your quick and remarried, moved to Tennessee with my second wife. So anyway,
Yeah.
another story.
That's right.
Don't-
okay.
watch out for the rabbit trail.
That's all right, no.
They're out there.
We rabbit trail. I am curious. You said you felt the draw to preaching, and that wasn't right. So growing up in a world where certain things are kind of put upon you, or put on, these are the things that you do, these are the things that you believe, these are the things that you should think. Obviously, that has a huge shaping thing in your life. So you move away from that, and so that's not for me, which is a conversation for another time. But moving to Huntsville, that's a significantly different. I tell people often, Huntsville is the most, outside of maybe Nashville, Huntsville is the most un-Southern city in the South that you can move to, because it's such a place of technology
Yeah.
and industry, and so
Melting pot.
So we're from the South, but there's a lot of things that were not Southern about the city we grew up in. And I've wondered before, we made this big, I do want to tell this story at some point. We made this big shift from in our faith tradition, the denominational tradition or whatever, familial tradition that we grew up in, Christianity-wise. And there was this, I wonder how much of that even informs a move like that, and a shift like that, and an evolution of thinking like that, where all of a sudden it is more of you are part of a bigger melting pot, and there are new ways to think about things and those kinds of things. But anyway, for this episode and this story, because back to the other for just a second, you have taken us as my dad, you and mom, but largely you really steered and laid the foundation for the way in which I think about spirituality, and the way I make my connection with God and theology and all the things that I think about. And so that didn't just come because I was just a weirdo. It came from the fact that, and thought differently, you guys laid a path of saying it's okay to, and gave an example that it's okay to challenge just what you always hear and what is just handed to you, and that sometimes there's a place to accept that, and then there's also time to move on and do something different and to challenge that and to think differently. So the only way that I am the way I am and have become the person that I've become is because of the groundwork that you have laid out in front of me. And I attribute so much of the way that I think and the way that I process and all that stuff to you and the way you live that out in front of us. And so that's huge. And there's plenty we can go into in that. But today, I want to set the scene. So, Dad, I want you to so we are talking today about this event that happened, and all of a sudden you found yourself in a position where your mental capacities, what you're thinking, the way you're feeling about a situation could have gone very easily down two very different paths, but you were able to steer that ship in a particular way. And so much of what we do on this podcast is talking about the way we ritualize things, the way we engage with our life in such a way to begin to shape and rewrite narratives that could be destructive narratives, unhelpful ways of thinking about things, and learning to see life from a different perspective. And this story really exemplifies that. So set the scene. We're going to get into this story now. Set the scene on what is happening in our life, what's going on where this story takes place.
Okay, so we talked about a big picture and a small picture.
Yeah.
So everything up until now has been decades and decades, but the actual story we keep evasively getting ourselves to.
Yeah.
We're talking about 10 minutes, not
Okay.
years and years. We're talking about 10-minute setup, or not setup, 10-minute event. But the setup for that was, at the time this happened, I would have been about, which is hard to believe, about 2 years younger than you are.
Oh, wow.
Now, that's what blows my mind before we even start. But the household by this time was me and your mom, and you were the oldest in the house because your oldest brother, Seth, is already married and out of the house by now. And then there was you, there was Matthew, 2 years younger than you, and then Aaron, 4 years younger than Matthew. So whatever age that makes you, you were 20. No, you weren't. It was like you were 17. You were
17. Okay.
You were newly driving, and that's a very, very important part of this story because our household involved that, and you were driving now. So there was me and Donna, your mom, my wife, and then there was you, 3 people driving, and we had 3 cars, which is not necessary for survival, but is nice when you got 3 people going 3 different directions to have 3 sets of wheels getting you there. And it's not, but you can make things work if it's less than that. But we had 3. And a situation had come up where we were in church one Sunday morning, and a young couple was there that was struggling in various ways, and one of them was needed money and he needed a car and all this. And so somehow
and their names you got to give.
I got to give names.
You got to give names. It's too good.
Anthony.
Okay.
Shyla.
Anthony and Shyla.
And they had apparently somewhat of a history that people knew about that we didn't know about with that church, and they had.
Okay.
I will just say it this way: they had blown through and blown out and blown back in, and we had no idea. We were sitting there unsuspectingly in front of them in class, and he was speaking enough to let it be overheard for those who needed to overhear it that they didn't have money for rent and things like that. So, and your mom and I, how we would do naturally, as people should do. You know that here's a need, but as we were walking out of the class, he was saying it again. Well, of course, I turned around and introduced myself to him, and there, before the day is over, we're in their house eating key lime pie and handing over money. Well, that was the intent, but we were, helped them with the rent and all. Right. So we developed, as you might imagine, a relationship with this couple. I was getting daily phone calls, more than I really had bargained for, and I was suddenly his parent. He said that, you're like my dad in the Lord. Well, it's kind of a compliment, you think, but. Anyway, no, I'm getting too far off.
No, that's good. So, because Dad and the Lord to him meant you're the one that I call to shell out money to.
Well, okay. So back to the story. I'm going to try to not,
No, this is good.
This is not a 6-hour presentation. So
this is good.
Situation came up. Remember, I mentioned the cars. That's important. Well, their car was down for the count. And obviously nothing to. I could either pay to fix the thing or loan him one of our 3.
Because those are your only 2 options.
So we were going to loan him for 1 week our car, the one that I drove. There were 3 of them. I drove the one, the least of them all. So I guess, even though it seemed very generous to loan him that one, but that's the one I drove every day. So it was going to get him around. So he was going to be driving the 3rd car, and for a week. Well, we were about 3 weeks into that week when this happened. And when you got 3 drivers, 2 cars, naturally there's going to come a situation where somebody's the odd man out. Well, this was my day to be the odd guy out. So I was at work, and then the parking lot didn't have my car in it. That was either you or Mom. Y'all were both in the other 2 cars. You were probably in the one that I would have otherwise been in. So I was without a car, bottom line.
The Blueberry.
A blue
Dodge Colt.
A 1991 Dodge Colt 5-speed. Nothing fancy about it except for this. It would get you everywhere. And when it's time to get off work, it would have been very important for that car to have been there at my disposal. And it wasn't. Well, no big deal.
How did you discover it wasn't there? Did you walk out to the parking lot?
Walking out to the parking lot and there not be somebody sitting there waiting for me was a pretty good indication that, one of them, I don't know who was supposed to. I figured between the 2 of you, y'all would have figured out somebody's task was to go pick up Dad. Well, you weren't there.
After all, there's only, at this point in the family, there's only one person bringing in income that's paying for these 3 cars.
Well,
First.
that's coming, but what do you do when it's 1999? Now, the cell phones existed, but, it was at that stage when some did and some didn't, and I was on the didn't.
Yeah.
I was a slow arriver in that. So back upstairs I go to where the phone is, not in my pocket, and upstairs. I pick it up and call, what do I call? The house. Back in the day when you made a phone call, you're calling the phone that sits in the house and stays in the house. You didn't have a cell phone. Mom didn't have a. So I called, and it rang, and nobody answered. So what does that mean? Nobody's home.
Yeah.
People have forgotten about that.
That's a hard
When
to
people
believe.
don't answer their phone, it doesn't mean they're not home. It means they're not answering.
Yeah.
Well, y'all weren't home. And so here I was. There was no other calling. If they're not going to answer the phone at home, that's all the calling there's going to be.
There's nowhere else to call.
I had no idea where you two were. You could have been on the moon for all I knew. But somewhere along the line, somebody either forgot that their job was to pick me up or you're just late. But it was up to me to guess which of the two it was. So I thought, well, I can either just stand here and helplessly wait for something that may or may not happen, or I could just walk home.
Yeah.
I live 4 miles, not bad. It's September, good time of the year, not raining, a nice day. So I thought, well,
The kilometers for that, what would that be? Like maybe 6.5.
probably about, it's whatever the ratio of 80 over 55. But that's because of the speed limit signs.
Yeah, okay.
I always knew the ratio, but
Okay.
it was 4 miles, 6.5 kilometers, something like that.
Okay.
I could have been there in less than, a little over an hour on a nice day. Not bad. Very, very busy road, but I felt like I could navigate my way safely. So anyway, I start walking. Yeah. So, well, here I go walking home. Now, here's where the story is. Sorry for the big buildup.
No,
but
this is good.
here we are. I'm walking home. And as I start walking, making the left turn and the left turn and the right turn, and the things I would be doing behind the steering wheel of a car, I'm on foot, but I'm walking home. And I got to thinking, this is a little bit annoying because I own 3 cars, and just to make it even a little more annoying was the fact they were all paid for. I wasn't even making payments on them. I had a driver's license up to date. All 3 cars had insurance up to date. They all had a tag up to date. I thought, okay, I've got the cars, they're paid for. I got the title, I've got proof of ownership, I've got an active license, and I've got insurance. And I get to thinking, what does a person have to do to drive home from work? And all those things that make me just thoroughly qualified to be on the road driving, and here I go on foot walking home from work as the owner of 3 cars. And that just started getting a little bit under my skin, step by step. And I kept getting that over and over in my mind. I was going down that list of things, and saying, why am I walking home from work? And what does a person have to do to be able to do this simple thing? I'm not talking about doing something elaborate. I just want to get home.
Yeah.
And I'm walking. And then that kept going through my mind, walking home from work. Here am I walking home. Why am I walking home from work? And I was just to the point of annoyance and frustration and aggravation, and thought, well, I must have been a sight, probably stomping home from work by now. But that thought occurred to me, and then as it did, I was probably about maybe less than a mile into it at this point, but far enough to where I've covered some ground. I've got some pavement behind me, and I've still got a ways to go. Probably beginning to sweat. Well, I can think of worse things, but I still was thinking, well, it just adds to the annoyance when you don't want to be. And then, but here's the key to it, though. Suddenly that expression, walking home from work, hit me like a pile of gravel, just a ton of bricks, whatever. Walking home from work. And I realized in this moment of agitation, I was repeating over and over into my mind something that had to get hammered in so it would finally hit me as the confession of the amazing blessing I was confessing to myself while trying to be agitated.
Yeah.
Walking home from work. 3 massive blessings in that complaint. First of all, I was walking. There are people all over sitting in wheelchairs that would give anything to be walking. There are people that have missing limbs that would love to be walking. Anywhere. From anywhere to anywhere, just be walking.
Yeah.
And I was doing that very painlessly. And not only that, I was walking, and a lot of people walk, but they can't walk home because they don't have a home. They're homeless. They can walk all day long, but they sure can't walk home. They don't have a place to call home. So there was that. I was walking home, and I thought, well, that's amazing. I'm walking home. Okay, I was beginning to lighten up a little. And then I realized, well, that's not all I'm confessing here. I'm walking home
Yeah.
from work.
Wow.
Not only work, but the best job I'd ever had.
Really?
At that time, it was really a very satisfying job up to that time. And thought there are a lot of people who'd love to be walking and walking home, but they can't walk home from work because they don't have a job. There are people looking for jobs, and it wasn't like now where you can just get a job. They were hard to come by.
Wow.
So here I was walking and walking home and walking home from the best job ever, and all of a sudden, those steps I wasn't trudging, I was more like floating, and I
Wow.
thought, wow, why am I complaining? And just at that exact moment, when I had that transition within just moments, then I heard a car drive up, turned around, looked, and there were you in the Blueberry. I thought, wow, and you were probably expecting to see a very agitated person. Instead, I floated into the car and said, guess what? You had all this good. If you had driven up 60 seconds sooner,
Wow.
this entire thing would have never happened. I would have never had that moment. So you drove up just at the highlight of my moment, and by the time you got home, you'd heard the whole story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is the walk. That's the mental about face on a homeward trudge,
I love
and
it.
that's the best way I could describe it.
Now, so obviously, you have this major shift from irritation to deep gratitude. Nothing in your circumstances change. You're still walking. You don't know I'm on my way to pick you up. You have no idea. As far as you know, you've still got another 4 kilometers or whatever to go, a couple miles to go. What was it? Do you think that switched that for you? How did that mental shift take place? And have there been other times when you've remembered that and said, "Man, the circumstances aren't going to change here, but there's a way that I can apply that same way of thinking to."
Yeah. Well, first of all, just the fact that the expression itself was kind of hammering at me. Walking home from work, listen to yourself. Listen. What are you saying?
Wow.
But I think the reason that it was possible that the transition even occurred was the fact that, of course, having the benefit of never having a time in life that I didn't have an awareness of God. And that he was there. I think that you kind of have yourself already conditioned just by a lifetime of belief.
Yeah.
I would say that was the case because, what if I just hadn't been conditioned all my life, not necessarily by hammering a regiment home, but just having it be a part of your psyche and your DNA, if I could use that. It's not scientific, but still mentally inside your spirit, I think that I was just kind of pre-programmed to have your mind turn that direction. Ultimately, that's all I can say. I haven't really thought about it until you asked, but why would that have happened? Because I could have been irritated the rest of the day, and not to pat myself in the back. I'm just saying that when there is a better way to interpret a situation, unless you just enjoy the concept of agitation, and there are people that seem to, but I would say that I would much rather have gotten home in the state of mind that I got home in than what it's going to be, because how was that evening going to go? I was just glad, whatever it is, and getting to that place where you found me walking. I don't know what went through your mind. When you got to work and I wasn't there, something told you he must be walking home from work. And something told you we'll just take the regular route, and then there you were seeing me from behind. I don't know whatever went through your mind. I've never asked you, but maybe you've got your own version.
To be honest, I had forgotten that I was the one that came and picked you up.
It was not as impactful to you as what?
No, as soon as you said that, I thought, okay, no, I do remember you telling me that story on the way home. And as soon as you said, and then I heard a car, it's like, oh, wait a minute, that was me that picked you up.
Yeah.
I do remember that now. But I'd forgotten that was part of the story. It's really, really, really fascinating. We started, the whole reason I started the Substack, which is what these podcasts are usually based off of, or my posts, is because you were wanting to start writing, and some of these stories, you've got so many stories and so many great things to say. And so you actually got me started in the Substack, but my very first articles were on this concept of ritual and reclaiming the art of ritual. And a ritual is just something that you, anything that you do repetitively, but you do it with a sense of the holy, or a sense of the divine, a sense of the sacred, and you begin to see the mundane tasks, the repetitive tasks of your day as these sacred activities. And just that simple man, I'm saying this over and over, that repetition, but all of a sudden it went from you said I'm going to become aware of this thing that I'm saying, or you became. It's almost like the Spirit just kind of gave you an awareness of, do you realize what you're saying to yourself over and over again? And the power of, whether it's a conscious thing that we're saying to ourselves, that's building a very negative mindset that shapes our life, or because, like you said, if you had continued down that negative trajectory, by the time you reached home, you would have been ready to just chew everybody. Not that that's your personality anyway, but in fact,
it would have been convenient for that to have been my personality. If I had wanted if I wanted to come home and ruin everybody's night,
you could have done it.
There was a great opportunity to do it.
Yep.
And again, that's not to my credit. It's just I think there's sometimes you deal with the tools you've been given.
Yeah.
But also you got to take those and you combine that with the things that you just learn. And then you can combine those two things, because it was an opportunity for a very unpleasant evening, and it was a great night.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't remember a thing in the world about that night.
Which is probably right.
Which is probably because of the fact that it got fixed before we got a chance to break it. But yeah, that was, I do think that it was just, I was hammering that same effort to try to be irritated. It was kind of against my nature to be that way anyway. And the circumstances were throwing themselves out, say, here's a great chance for you to really, kind of let your steam out. I don't know whatever became of that car. That's another story. There's so many other, you were the one involved in going to retrieve my long missing car. That was a different story, but that week turned into a month, I think.
Oh, that's right.
And remember when it came time to go get it, he didn't bring it back. By this time, he'd gone to work selling flashy new cars. Well, who's going to be seen driving the car itself is another story.
Yeah.
But he would have no interest in driving that car back to me when he could be driving one of those that he sells. So we had to go drive to another city, pick up the car. By this time, it's sitting in the junk pile with a dead battery. We had to jump it off to get it home. So, but I digress. But anyway, the story, the worst experience it was bringing that car home, the better, because that just helped embellish the story.
Yeah. That's so true. Well, we're eventually on this podcast. I keep saying we're going to do a series on the Enneagram. Dad's an Enneagram 9, and the gift of the 9 is to, whatever you encounter, you're going to find a way to live for peace and to seek peace. And that speaks so much to your character. It speaks so much to your heart. There's been so much in life, again, for other podcasts, maybe at some point, but there's been so much difficulty and so much trial. I saw you, the last time I saw you before this trip was coming home, because you had just lost your second wife to cancer, and yet, all these things that life throws at you, that you have always had this ability to not use to make yourself more bitter, to make yourself more frustrated or angry, and you just, I don't want to say it's waters off a duck's back, because that's not true. That's not how grief works. You actually find these really healthy ways to deal and to engage those difficulties. But this is one of them, and you didn't just shove it under a rug, and you didn't explode, but you found a way to transmute those feelings of frustration through the practice of gratitude, to change not only your outlook, but the way that it flowed into the rest of the family. And you didn't chew me out when I got there and picked you up, and that just speaks so much to your character and who you are as a person. You've encountered so much maybe pushback and difficulty throughout your life, and yet you have always found a way, because of who you are and because of your gifts and what God's both nature and nurture, you have found a way to cultivate seeking the peace and even in difficult situations. And I think that's amazing, and that makes that's had a huge impact on me and my life and my outlook on the world. And we're just so glad that you jumped on. This will be one of many stories we hear. This is Conversations with Dad, a mental about face on a homeward trudge. And thanks for coming and telling the story.
It was nice to be able to air it out again. And it is as simple as it was. It was not it wasn't a big event in the world stage. And yet you think about it inside the brain of the person that's going through it, you say, well, that was kind of a milestone in a way, because it was something that people seem to find encouraging to hear about. So
Yeah.
it's a pleasure to share it, and to tell, and the fact that it did have, I think, not only a good ending for the moment, but I think it's something we can draw from for whatever comes next.
Awesome. That's great. All right. Love you, Dad. And
Love you.
talk to you later.
Again.
Bye.